Looks like we have 4 of us in person and 3 online. Cool. All right, well, I think we have a quorum then.
Good.
So we can call the meeting to order. Lead off with our land acknowledgement. Land acknowledgement is a formal statement that recognizes and respects Indigenous peoples and the enduring relationship that exists between Indigenous peoples and the land. I'd like to acknowledge that we live and work on the unceded land of the Dena'ina people and thank them for their past, present, and future stewardship of the land on which we all live. Also a note on the Teams chat as a reminder that the chat is not part of the official record of the meeting, so if you make a comment in the chat, be sure to put it in the record so we have a complete record of our meeting. With that, I think we can proceed to roll call. And by the way, I don't think I know the OMB folks in the room right now. If you guys want to introduce yourselves.
My name is Erin Baker. I'm the new administrative officer with OMB.
Excellent.
And my name is Sharon Lebner, and as of today, I'm the new OMB director.
Excellent. Okay.
My first day.
Congratulations.
Very good. Congratulations. Are you're interim or you're the full director?
My title is interim OMB director.
Okay. Very good. Very good. Thank you. It's good to have you guys. Then if we could proceed with our roll call.
Okay. Mr. Mark Lucan.
Here.
Mr. Brian Flynn.
Here.
Mr. Nolan Clouda.
Here.
Mr. Al Tamani.
Here.
Mr. Matthew Harvey.
Here.
Ms. Rachel Reese. Mr. Robert Helser. Mr. Jared Riedel.
Present online.
Ms. Lindsay Hobson.
Here.
Ms. Carla McConnell.
Good afternoon, I'm here.
And Ms. Carmela Warfield.
Hello, I'm here.
Sherry, you have the floor.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you. Then next up, the approval of the agenda. Of course, the bulk of our meeting is probably going to be discussing the budget. Motion to approve.
Move to approve the agenda.
Okay, got a motion from Matthew. Thank you. Did anyone second?
I second.
Okay, second from Al. Thank you. Thank you. Then with that, we can move on. I do not have a formal report from the chair. I'm definitely glad to see participation and attendance picking up on the BAC. That definitely does my heart some good. And I realize that even now it's especially hard to participate with the road situation we've got. So definitely appreciate everyone who's able to make it in person or virtually, for that matter. So, but otherwise, we can move forward with the assembly report, and I believe we have Assembly Member Brawley with us.
Yeah, hi everyone, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Yeah, and so I'll give the report, happy to answer some questions, and then I'll note we had a special meeting scheduled at noon today, so I'll need to sign off a few minutes, at least a few minutes before noon. So I'll just give a brief update and then I can answer questions. So on Thursday, also thank you for moving your meeting. I know you normally meet on the second Thursday, and it was moved in part to accommodate our work session on amendments that day. So I appreciate that. So we had our budget work session looking at all the members' amendments. That was on Thursday the 9th. You can find that recording online and also the packet of amendments on our work sessions page. I can make sure the staff have that, but shouldn't be hard to find. And sorry, there's some commotion in the house. Some of the highlights of amendments in general, we are focusing on our priorities consistent with the resolution that we passed back in September. So that includes making sure there's adequate funding for winter maintenance, prioritizing public safety and emergency services, encouraging and really boosting recruitment and retention of employees. So not just getting folks in those vacancies, but hoping they stick around for more than a couple years, and then just generally maintaining a high level of service citywide. So that was kind of our broad goals. There's a few other specifics in that resolution. So some of the amendments that you'll see in the packet, there's obviously a lot of them. Most of them have to do with the operating budget, but we're also looking at the capital budget, which is mostly relevant for what we ask from the state, and then also what'll go on the bond in January, or I should say in April, but to be finalized in January. So there was some discussion of the parks bond in particular, if you go back and listen to that work session. But some of the specific amendments to highlight, one of them was brought by member Zach Johnson from South Anchorage, increasing the APD, basically increasing funding for APD labor. That reflects a new contract that I believe is either still being negotiated or has almost been finished. So really anticipating that for next year. Another one brought by myself and Budget Co-Chair Zalatel is a pay boost for what we're calling mission critical pay for snowplow operators. So the staff that we have working out there, and that's in addition to basically the new baseline of funding that the Assembly put forward for 2023 that Mayor Bronson carried forward into 2024, which you'll see in his budget. Also funding to support, like I said, our policy priorities. So for example, housing, we've been focused on transportation issues. So of course, not just road maintenance, but safe transportation generally, community engagement around these priorities. And that's really building on the success of the housing summit that we had last week. Thankfully, before the snow came, we were able to fit that in, but really had a lot of great attendance, over, I think, almost 200 or 150 people, not 200, plus those watching online. So really feeling like in our role as conveners that we can continue to engage the public, give updates, hopefully on the other side of some successes next year around housing policy, and then also looking ahead to other priorities as well. Another amendment is to reverse the proposed $2.6 million in labor cuts. So that was discussed at length in the budget work sessions in October, but essentially there are some unallocated cuts in multiple departments, including the library, health department, parks department, a few others. And so those weren't really cutting positions, but essentially would be unfunded positions. And so if and when we get fully staffed up, there would not be that funding to actually support those positions that exist. And so myself and members Zalatel are bringing an amendment around that. And then there's also a lot of really good ones in there, things around transit, around housing. We're still kind of waiting to see how it all shakes out, because of course we can't exceed, the funding we have. Also looking at alcohol tax, both, the revenue for FY24 and then the fund balance from prior years. We are a little bit hampered because we still don't know how much money is left over from FY22. We have, I think, still have provisional numbers. And then of course, we're not going to know for some time, how much money was left over from FY23. We do anticipate some fund balance. There's some complications there with how you measure fund balance, because there does have to be obviously savings put aside. There's our building safety services fund that we're looking to dig into more next year. But really, so we know for sure, what our basic budget is going to be. We don't know how much money we may have in terms of leftover funding to put toward one-time expenditures. So, and of course, the other things that come up like contracts. So in terms of next steps, and then I'll move to questions. The next step is that our meeting on November 21st, we have one more public hearing for the operating and the capital budget and the enterprise and utilities budget. And then after that, we will be taking up those amendments, and the plan is to vote on the budget on next Tuesday. So barring any kind of unexpected changes to that, we will be moving forward with that. And again, so there's still opportunity to testify. There's opportunity to consider if you guys want to take any action, for example, in terms of a resolution or making comments. And then of course, we also welcome individual comments from everybody. So with that, I can pause and take questions.
Yeah, I think we got a question from Mark.
No, I didn't have a question.
Okay.
Sorry.
Go ahead, Al.
I mentioned to you, I think, at our last meeting about auditing municipal grants to nonprofits, and you were going to check on that.
Yeah. So what I know in terms of general auditing, we have an internal audit staff. I believe our auditor is acting. So we had somebody retire. So our staff is down, and there is limits on how much they can they can do in a year. So I'll have to look into the audit schedule for 2024 in terms of auditing our nonprofit grants. Part of that has to do with ARPA. So we have currently, or I should say not we, the Assembly, but the municipality has on contract an individual who is helping with essentially all of the compliance and reporting that needs to happen for ARPA. So I don't know right now the specific plan for auditing all of those grants, but there is a lot of kind of compliance reporting that needs to happen that happens with that third party contractor. And I believe the deadline for basically encumbering or obligating all of our ARPA funds is coming up soon. And so we're going to have one more year of kind of that reporting and compliance. And then, and I apologize, I don't have a better answer yet on the auditing piece, but I will follow up on that as well.
Thank you. I think Carla, either Carla or Lindsay was next. Go ahead, Carla.
I'm ready if it's okay. So Anna, sorry.
Still with us, Carla?
Can you hear me?
Now I can.
Oh, okay. Sorry about that. I'll talk a little bit louder. So Anna, you mentioned that part of the budget cuts, I believe from the mayor's office, came from positions that are vacant right now, correct? That was part of the budget cut, but you're saying if we hire those people, we'll have a shortfall. Is that correct?
So it's a little complicated, and you may want to go back and listen to the discussion from, there was 2 work sessions where acting OMB director at the time presented it along with some departments. We kind of heard conflicting things, because in some departments we heard that they had actually almost filled all of their positions. Of course, the budget had been prepared, I think, back in August, or, it moves through a process. So it could be that there was some old information. So depending on the department, like the library, they said they do intend to be fully staffed up. And then there's a few others, like the Parks Department, for example, that are seasonal. So honestly, it's hard to tell. We got some kind of conflicting information from different people.
I thought that's what you just said in your report, something about bringing an amendment for that. Was I mistaken?
No, the amendment that we're bringing is, so there's it's a total of 2.6 million cuts across multiple departments. Like I mentioned, the ones I listed off, library and health and parks and rec. So each of those departments have different vacancy levels right now, but essentially it would be basically defunding not specific positions, but defunding a portion of that department's budget for labor, such that if and when they hire all of their folks by the end of the year, there would not be the money to do that. And in some cases, it sounded like the departments were actually almost fully staffed up at this time.
That's what I thought I understood. So my question, and I think you kind of answered it in your answers there, is whether or not any of those positions that are empty have been long-term, like they've been empty for a year, 2 years, that they can definitely be defunded without problems.
Yeah, I think we heard, again, it depends on the department. Some of them are more dealing with turnover shorter term. I think with IT, they did mention there were some positions that were longer term, but of course, IT is those are hard positions to fill because they're so specific. And of course, we've had IT issues in the past, so you don't want to cut that department too much. I literally just finished a training module on cybersecurity and the kind of increasing threat of things like AI and fake websites. So it's hard to say kind of, what is the right level of staffing for something like an IT department. But of course, we're dealing with protected health data, with, a ton of employee data, all those things. So it's not something that I would want to skimp on.
Okay, thank you so much.
Yep.
Lindsay.
Yeah, can you guys hear me?
Yes,
yes.
You're good.
Okay. So my question was on the alcohol tax and the carry forward balance, and carrying forward the fund balance, and how do you do that if, I was just sort of surprised that from fiscal year 22, you still don't know what that is. And so just kind of how does that work, and how would that operate in 2024 on a 2022 balance?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I'll clarify, the fund balance that we're waiting for is really the general government. So obviously we budgeted up to a certain amount. The tax cap is set, and a certain amount of taxes are collected in a year. And so that's really what we don't know because it depends on vacancies, underspending, whatever it looks like. So that's general government. And then Sharon, I know is just starting this job, but may have a better answer in terms of that. The alcohol tax that, there is, it's a smaller fund balance. Over the last few years since it was enacted in 2021, there has been kind of underspent or something like a grant that didn't move forward. And so over the last couple of years, the Assembly has already reappropriated some of that fund balance from prior years. But we still expect that there will be some underspending. And so in terms of alcohol tax, we can make an educated guess based on our budget to actual reports that we get. There are a couple specific things that we're trying to get out the door by the end of the year, but we know, for example, there may be 1.75 million that was already earmarked for a grant for prevention grants. Isn't going to necessarily go out the door this year, and so we know that money would be either available to reappropriate or to try again in the coming year. So in some cases it may be reappropriated. In other cases, we know the need is still there, and so the intent would be to just move it forward into the new year.
Got it. Thank you.
And Al, I think Al had a question.
In the mayor's budget, does that include the Assembly as budget?
Yes. Yeah. So we are obviously not a department exactly, because we're a separate branch of government. But for budgeting purposes, we are listed with the other departments essentially. And so yes, we and the same is true for the mayor's office. So we approve the budget for the entire municipality. We also approve the budgets for things like enterprise and utilities, which includes the port. And then there we usually, there's not as much kind of policy choices from the Assembly side because it's really those entities bringing their budgets forward. But ultimately we do vote on all of them.
So, and I've got one also, Anna, the reversal of the 2.6 million in labor cuts. There's always a vacancy factor in every budget every year, right? It's just that this year we were assuming a very large one because of, recent labor shortages, right? So reversing this doesn't really change any intent as far as departments hiring. It's just more so giving them the budget to actually do the hiring that they're planning to do. Is that right?
Yeah, and yeah, so the administration would be better to speak to how they factored in the vacancy factor generally. But what we're looking at is a specific line item in certain departments that's listed as a one-time labor reversal. So it's not a recurring, it's not a permanent cut to those departments, and therefore it can be reversed. But it's essentially assuming that we wouldn't fill a large number of positions by the end of next year. And so that's, as I understand it, and again, Sharon or somebody else can correct me, but as I understand it, that's above and beyond the normal vacancy factor.
Okay, I do have a question now. I volunteered last month to do a deep dive on the maintenance and operations budget. And so I did spend a little time looking at that. A couple of things that jumped out at me was the fact that about 43%, depending on what number you use as your denominator, but about 43% of that budget is purely debt service. So instead of a $109 million budget for maintenance and operations, we really have a $61 million budget that actually is going to be used for maintaining our streets, removing snow and that type of thing. So that's just an interesting note. The other question I had is, I just printed this out this morning. On the overall budget, there is the continuation level for 2024 and then a proposed budget number. Do those additions, those amendments, or those proposed changes, are those the amendments that you put in for this budget? You mentioned,
so if you're looking, yeah, I'll comment briefly on both of these. For maintenance and operations, that is correct that a large number or a large amount of their budget is debt service. I can't speak to the kind of ins and outs of how that works, but I know you'll see that in other departments as well, like the RT department. And really, I guess the bottom line is a lot of our budget is not discretionary choices, right? It's It's required labor increases or other things like that. So debt service is in that category. But I would encourage you to speak with you could contact the Muni manager, Kent Colhase, or Lance Wilbur, the community development director, or the Shay Throop, the acting director of MNO, if you had specific questions there.
Yeah.
And then on the continuation budget, so if you're looking at the budget that was published on October 2nd, all of that draft budget is the mayor's draft budget. And so that's really the step that we're at. And it's equivalent to the governor's draft budget that goes to the legislature. So, and again, Sharon can speak in more detail to this, but the continuation aspect is really step one, or one of the first steps in the budgeting process, which is to say, applying all, like I said, all labor increases, all kind of required changes, backing out anything that's called a one-time expenditure or a change, because those aren't intended to be carried forward. And then, so you're really starting with, that's the budget template that you're starting with, essentially. And then anything after the continuation point is a policy choice, whether it's an increase or a decrease in that budget. So you'll see in the mayor's version of the budget, they made some policy choices, and then our assembly amendments would be the additional policy choices before the final version of the budget.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
I've got another one, Anna. The police labor amount for their collective bargaining is a $2.8 million amendment. That's the one from Assemblymember Johnson. Is that $2.8 million to reflect what's already been negotiated with their union for 2024, or is that a new increase to police labor?
So I'm not as familiar with the ins and outs of the labor agreement, but yes, that would be consistent with what was negotiated, as I understand it. So it's not in addition to what they had proposed, but they're working through their new contract now. So I'm not sure exactly what step it's at. It'll come to the assembly eventually for ratification, but we aren't there yet. But yes, I believe this is consistent with that.
Okay, yeah, so I was just wondering if it's part of their collective bargaining, then it doesn't feel like optional spending, right? It's either the increase has to go through or we're cutting the positions, right?
Yeah, and I think some of that has to do with the budget timing. Of course, I understand in past years the administration, some administrations have been more proactive in terms of bringing additional amendments, and so I think that's where we are right now. But yes, and I think the one thing I have heard about that increase, I think I remember Member Johnson saying, is part of it is to be competitive with the state troopers' pay, which was increased. And of course, I think both police and fire, it seems like we end up losing folks either to the state or to other states or other cities out of state because we're not as competitive here at the Muni right now.
Okay, yeah, Matthew.
Yeah, you maybe if you know this off the top of your head, you mentioned that the assembly offered some amendments regarding housing, specifically maybe actions out of the Housing Action Summit. Could you maybe just briefly describe some of those amendments? Like what would those amendments be?
Sure. Yeah, one of them, a couple sit within the assembly department itself, or they would when passed. One is to continue the work that we're doing with communications, convening, which means, hosting events. So this past year we hosted a retreat and a housing summit. The housing summit in particular was really designed to bring the community together. So we are hoping to continue that success and to understand not just that we'll want to be, reporting back or continuing to work on housing, but that there's other assembly priorities such as transportation. So looking ahead to, maybe having a transportation summit next fall, for example. Another one of the amendments that I have brought was to the planning department. One of the recommendations that came out of the summit was really better public communication about zoning changes, how to build ADUs, things like that. And so really this amendment would supplement that work in the planning department to produce some more public facing materials. For example, here's the steps to go through an ADU. Here's a flow chart of going through the approval process in the permitting department, those kinds of things. And then of course, we're anticipating more zoning changes, such as the one proposing allowing or making it easier to build 3 and 4 plexes in areas that they're already allowed. And so things like that could really help educate folks, and especially small property owners who maybe are in a position to build one of those or to start building one.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, tons of great information. Thanks for being able to share with us, Anna.
Yeah. And I do need to sign off, but I'll just mention again that there, like I said, there was a work session last Thursday. There's a great PowerPoint as well as the whole PDF packet of amendments. So I will send that to OMB staff so they can circulate that. And then of course it was all on Teams because the offices were closed, so you can watch the recording as well.
So I also emailed everyone just while we were sitting here the amendment packet, and I apologize. I should have been proactive in getting that out ahead of time, but I sent that out to folks. So there is a good yeah. Those are definitely worth looking through for everyone to get a sense of where things might go.
I'm not sure I understand.
Okay.
Yes. So thank you.
Okay. Yeah, and I apologize.
I had sorry, just a question on that. Are we going to have any kind of a resolution as a body with regard to the proposed amendments, or?
I think
We've done
that
that in the
is going to be kind of our main discussion today, actually.
Okay.
So yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Well, thank you, everybody. And again, please feel free to send questions in the meantime. And otherwise, I or Meg will see you next month.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you.
Yep.
So moving on to ASD, I think we've got both Kelly Lessons and Katie Parent here with us. So go ahead and proceed. Whoever wants to go first.
Hi, this is Kelly. Katie, thank you for being here. I'm going to say that I have a meeting at 12, so I'm going to be very brief. That was scheduled before this. Very briefly, school board meetings this month were on the 7th and will be again next week on the 21st. At the board's finance committee meeting on the 2nd, we reviewed a draft of our annual comprehensive financial report. We also discussed ASD steps for decreasing costs associated with healthcare management. At session we had on the 7th, the board reviewed the FY23, so 22-23 school year audit, which was clean. We discussed the scale of the FY25, so that's the 24-25 school year budget, and got a brief introduction of the administration's initial $62 million bond proposal in the context of more than $1 billion with a B backlog in deferred maintenance. So I will say that the majority of our time was spent understanding the at minimum $95 million structural deficit that's predicted for next school year's budget. That figure could change. Like if we wanted to roll back this year's savings from increasing our pupil-teacher ratios, that would increase the scale of the deficit. We do have a sizable fund balance to help bring that deficit down. If we spend down to the board minimum, we'd have about $42 million to offset. If a supermajority of the board spent a larger amount of the fund balance down to maybe $59 million, that still means that the board is going to have to close a $41 to $58 million structural deficit that has grown since the base student allocation was last adjusted in the 2016-2017 school year. And I will share in closing that this past weekend, the Alaska Association of School Boards met. So ASD members were collaborating and sharing with board members from across the state. And as an organization, the organization will be advocating for an increase to the base student allocation of no less than $1,655 for next year. So that hasn't gone super public yet, but I'm happy to share. And that is a reflection based on national CPI data of what the base student allocation would need to be to keep pace with, I think it's 29% inflation since July 1st, 2016. Plus a very small amount to help with maybe the Alaska Reads Act. So maybe I'll take like one quick question and then I'll leave it to Katie to fill in the rest because she's got all sorts of great information.
Could you just repeat that amount? I wasn't quite quick enough.
So the ask that the Alaska Association of School Boards will be advocating for is $16.55.
Thank you.
The technical, I mean, if you go to the CPI calculator and compare what the base student allocation was adjusted to on July 1st, 2016, and where it is now, we need $16.25 to make up ground. And this year, for context, we're receiving an additional $30 million to implement the Alaska READS Act. And ASD and districts around the state are pretty certain that the $30 is not enough to accommodate that. So there's a small additional increase tacked on to the 1625 figure. Does that help? So I'm sure we'll be hearing more about that once the legislative session gets going.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I'll put my link and my email in the chat if there are follow-up questions, and I'll turn it over to Katie. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, Kelly. Katie Parrott, I'm the Senior Director for Office of Management and Budget for ASD. Just to fill in a little bit more information related to some of what Kelly reported. We can confirm now that for ASD and for many districts that the $30 increment that was provided in the BSA was not sufficient to cover the cost of implementing the READS Act to fidelity. So that additional funds that are being requested by ASD in their advocacy is definitely needed to make sure that those activities can continue. Another important kind of discussion is using the Alaska urban CPI or inflation metric versus a national metric. There's been a lot of discussion about what seems to be more appropriate, and the consensus, I believe, amongst the districts is that we're really competing in terms of hiring and recruitment and retention from the lower 48. And many of our goods and services that districts across the state are having to purchase and acquire are being purchased from down south. That they're either not available or the rules we have in place require that we see competitive offers from all over. So really the use of the national inflation metric is appropriate. The other thing that factors into the district's budgeting, there's two things that are impacting FY25 in relation to loss of revenue. One of those things is that in the current year, we are expecting to fully expend all of the federal COVID relief money that the district had received in prior years and was able to roll forward. So next year, our budget cannot rely on those additional COVID relief funds to continue some of the activities that were implemented throughout the pandemic and some of the learning loss strategies that were used to support student outcomes. So many of those are, those activities, those expenses are looking to find a home in the midst of our budget crunch. The other thing is that with the decline of enrollment, there is a provision in the federal statute for the foundation formula that provides some smoothing of financial losses when that results because of a decline in enrollment. But that hold harmless provision only extends 3 years. And so next year's budget does not include any of that hold harmless revenue to be relied upon. So there are a couple of factors that are all coming together kind of to put some downward pressure on the budget process, which is kicked off last month and will start ramping up as we move closer to Christmas break to be able to provide a draft budget in January that the board would work through the approval process in February. So currently we have many departments who are putting together their asks for this next budget cycle. And over the next couple of months, we'll be going through a process internally of making adjustments to those budget requests. And so much more information will be provided through the board process and discussions that take place at the board level starting in December. As mentioned, there's a work session with the board to go over the budget priorities and to get some direction for implementing into the draft budget. So this is the beginning of a very busy season for us, and we'll make sure that we start getting some of this information out to the public and the community, and also seeking input and guidance from our stakeholders and community members as to what they really require and expect to see from the district's budget. So I will take any questions.
Yeah, Katie, can you repeat the part where you mentioned about the fund balance for ASD in the budget year? Did you say it's going to be fully depleted with the 2024 budget?
No, what I was referring to was the COVID relief, the federal COVID relief funds that were provided initially through the CARES Act and then the COVID response, or the Consolidated Appropriations Act, and then lastly through the American Rescue and Recovery Plan Act. So there were three main pots of COVID relief that were provided specifically to K-12 school districts. And the current year is the last year that we expect to have those available funds to supplement the district's operating fund budget.
And so even using those, even with using up those one-time funds, there's still, that still leaves a $95 million deficit.
Correct.
Wow, that's not good. Thank you. Other questions? Oh yeah, Matthew.
Yeah, do you have maybe a rough order of magnitude of what the annual spend from those federal funds was in the past few years?
Yeah, so yes, I do, and I can provide that to the committee, and it varied. So not all of the COVID relief funding was appropriated and then administered in the same year or evenly. That kind of was an ongoing thing at the beginning of the pandemic and then into 2021. And so there were some years where there was very, very little spend, and then other years where there were very large spends, particularly in certain areas where, let's say, we had some of the capital projects that the district engaged in. So I will pull that together and provide kind of a summary sheet to the committee, but some of that information is also included in our annual comprehensive finance reports. But that is a very, very large document, so I can also point to the sections that information is available.
Thank you. Other questions for Katie?
Mark, what's your delta on enrollment from last year?
Some of that information is still coming forward, and I'll have to check on what that difference is. I cannot recall off the top of my head, but what I will say is that we are continuing to see enrollment decline. And we're still kind of coming out of the period of time where the COVID pandemic really impacted enrollment to see what the new baseline is, because we know during that those couple of years there were huge dips and variations, and so now I think we're starting to see some information that might show what the new normal is.
Thank you.
I may ask you again next month.
I can provide that in the interim too.
Okay.
Good. Anything else? Thank you very much, Katie.
All right, you're welcome. Thank you.
Then we can move on. I'm not sure how you guys want to approach this an OMB report. I don't know. Did you guys have a presentation on the budget or anything you wanted to give high-level information on?
Not a formal presentation, but I wouldn't mind making a few comments.
Please.
if there's time. So I wanted to thank everybody for serving on this volunteer committee first. And I also wanted to thank Assembly Member Brawley for her presentation, because I appreciated her professional approach to the Assembly's amendments. There were a lot of them. And I really do appreciate the way that she presented the Assembly's amendments in a very professional fashion. I would like to address a couple of your questions with some additional comments. One of you asked about the housing items raised by the Assembly, and her response raised two of the items that the Assembly raised, but they were two of the smaller amendments raised by the Assembly. But there was a third, and it was much larger. And it was a $3 million amendment raised by Assembly Member Rivera. And it was one that caught my attention because by way of my professional background, I was CFO of the municipality of Anchorage under Mayors Begich and Clayman before moving to Native corporations for the last 15 years. And part of what I've done in the last 15 years is I've spent quite a bit of time in real estate. And so when Director Rivera was answering questions from his fellow Assembly members, they were asking quite a few questions about his very large proposed amendment, and they were asking, what do you intend to do with the funding? And his answers were broad. Number one, he said, well, we should rehabilitate abandoned properties and convert them into housing. And that caught my attention because from very painful personal experience, I can say that it can be more expensive to rehabilitate abandoned properties than it can be to build new. You've got at times lead-based paint removal, you can have asbestos, and then you can have ADA issues with old properties. Even the elevators in this building are probably not ADA compliant. And so there's a very common misconception that it's cheaper to rehabilitate an old building than to build new. So that first caught my attention. And then he also indicated that the money could simultaneously be used for rent stabilization. That caught my attention because my daughter's full-time job is working at Catholic Social Services, finding housing for homeless veterans. So I was thinking to myself, well, if the $3 million was instead for rent stabilization, it caught my attention because the funding was described in the amendment as one-time funding. So it's a little bit problematic for rent stabilization. You probably want rent stabilization to be recurring at one time. And also with rent stabilization, you would have quite a few policy decisions. For instance, would you give preference to someone who was pregnant versus someone who was a single male? Or is that illegal? Would you allow the funds to be given for an extra pet deposit, which is an issue that my daughter deals with? Would you allow a double security deposit for a client who has some extra challenges in his background? Things like that. And there would be so many policy decisions that you would want to work through, that it might take an entire year to come up with your policy. And my fear is that with that particular amendment, the funding would lapse before you'd have a program in place if you decided to go the operational route. Yet the proposed amendment, if my memory is correct, was to be placed in the real estate department, which would suggest a capital aspect to it rather than an operational aspect to it. So though the housing crisis is indeed extraordinarily important to our city, my feeling was that perhaps this could be something to consider via First Amendment 2024, when there's been an opportunity to put some additional structure to the proposed amendment. Additionally, there were over 40 amendments proposed, and some of them were redundant with others. For instance, there was a proposed amendment to, I think, Davis Park in Fairview, and there were 2 amendments proposed that were seemingly identical but had different amounts proposed. And so I would encourage this group, if they were interested in reiterating any of the amendments proposed by the Assembly, to be cautious about redundancy. Additionally, one of the things that caught my attention was that there was no total, grand total, sum total provided with the amendments. And that is concerning because of the importance to adhere to the tax cap. And you don't know if you've adhered to the tax cap if you don't know what the sum of the proposed amendments is. And finally, the reversal of the 2.6 million amendment was described as a reversal of labor cuts. And if we have time, I'd like to dig into that particular amendment. I've got it right here. This is this sheet where the 2.6 million is listed in the budget. And in retrospect, I'm a little bit embarrassed. This is my first day, so it's hard to talk about something that's very detailed. But if we had time to go back and add a little bit more detail in the budget, I would have put more description in support of the 2.6 million. But I wouldn't necessarily call it labor cuts because labor is not being cut. For instance, if we were to look at IT as an example, I was able to pull some statistics yesterday. IT, as of August 12th, had 85 budgeted positions, but only 72 were filled, which means that as of August 12th of this year, they had a 15% vacancy factor. But also, IT has a demonstrated history, a multi-year history of lapsing their budget, which means that every year they're budgeted more than they actually spend. So in 2019, as an example, they lapsed 1 million of their $23 million budget, which was 10% of the total general government lapse. And then it got worse. In 2020, they lapsed 2 million of their $23 million budget. And in that year was a crazy year for general government lapse because of fire and police. But in 2021, they lapsed 3.5 million. So the lapse is growing and growing and growing. In that year, they lapsed 11% of the total general government lapse. And it's getting worse. In 2022, their budget grew, but their lapse grew. So their lapse in 2022 was 4 million, representing 16% of total general government lapse. So what are we looking at in 2024 budget? Their vacancy factor, ignoring this item, is only $1.2 million. So in retrospect, we really shouldn't have had this column. If I had started 2 months ago, this column wouldn't exist and the vacancy factor would have been appropriately stated where it belongs, because this column has confused and irritated a lot of people. And in fact, we could have had a higher vacancy factor for some departments that don't have any numbers by their row, including police. But without a number for IT, you will have a vacancy factor of only $1.2 million for a department that in 2022 lapsed $4 million. So if this reversal proposed by the Assembly is in fact reversed, what will happen, and this is a certainty, is that they will lapse another several $1 million in 2024. And I agree that there's a goal to fill all vacant positions, and that goal should be something to strive for, my own department included. We have 2 vacant positions. However, easier said than done. It takes a lot of time and effort to fill a vacant position. And it would be an impossibility for a department as big as IT to fill and maintain filled all their vacant positions as of January 1, 2024. It's impossible to do that. So I encourage you as a group to be very skeptical for that one particular proposal, because it was just a little bit confusing the way it was presented in the budget. And we could talk about a couple of other departments, Parks and Rec being one of them. That one was mentioned by Assemblymember Brawley as well.
The one question I had that I didn't ask, because I figured she probably didn't have the information, but it'd be interesting to know how long many of these positions have been vacant.
So it would take probably hundreds of hours to research
Sure.
that information. I could talk about our teeny tiny department and say that my position was vacant a couple of months. And then we've got 2 other positions that have been vacant far longer. And sometimes it take when you have several vacancies, it tends to compound, because then the people who are remaining are working so hard they can't even post a position and fill it. And then it's a losing battle to fill your vacant positions.
Oh, I guess just my limited experience in this area, especially for technical positions, is, many of these positions have been vacant for probably 12 months or more.
I would probably, I don't know that for a fact, but I would guess that you are absolutely right.
So, that's, to then reverse your budget, in the hopes that you're going to maybe fill these vacancies doesn't really make a lot of sense. So,
if anything, this 2.6 million, if I were a betting person, it's not conservative enough. It probably should be $7 million, because if you notice, there are very large departments that have zeros by them. And so that traditionally have a lot of vacancy, right? And so the 2.6 million, if we could predict what the real number will be, it should be bigger. It's not big enough.
So what I want to kind of understand with it is that the 2.6 million, whether that's the right number or not, that represents an increase in the assumed vacancy factor that we have. There's a vacancy factor in every budget, right? We assume that we're not going to be able to fill all positions. So I'm trying to understand how different that 2.6 million is from historical norms. How is it a lot bigger? Is it ballpark? Like how?
So I think there's been a trend. And there's in the budget, one of the exhibits is the vacancy factor policy. And there's a vacancy factor policy that varies by the size of department. So if you have a department of 1, your vacancy factor should really be 0, right? But if you have a department of 500, you should have a pretty robust vacancy factor, because it would be impossible to have a department that's full year-round. But because the municipality has struggled more recently than, let's say, 10 years ago with vacancy, one of the things that this does is it demonstrates that even if we were to make this one of our highest priorities to fill positions, it would be impossible to do that on January 1. It's going to take some time and a lot of effort to cure the problem on the first of the year. So one way to look at this is we've dug ourselves into a hole. It's going to take time to dig out of the hole. That's how I would articulate it.
Because and on Anna's comment that she made also was about because I think she said that in a few cases it sounded like assuming the large vacancy factor might prevent departments from having enough money to fully hire. Is that, do you say that, are you saying that that's not likely to be true in any case?
So I would offer a friendly amendment to that comment. Back when I was CFO, the HR director came into my office and he had overspent his budget that year. So he came into my office late in the year. And what we did was we transferred some funding from one department to another department. And so I don't believe that that's true because we have the ability to move money from department to department. I think that library, she had said that there is a department that has filled some of their vacant positions. I think library is one where that could be the case. So library is one where we may be fortunate to take some funding from one department into library in 2024, which would be a great thing to do. But it won't stop us from filling library positions.
Questions? Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that was kind of one of my bigger questions was whether the reversal of one-time savings due to vacant positions was reversing it back to the normally used vacancy rate that's assumed in most budgets, or whether it's backing it up higher to a lower assumed vacancy rate. But then also, so the savings due to vacant positions, that would just go to, how are those savings realized? Is that increasing fund balance available, or is that just reducing tax capacity or reducing burden on tax capacity? How are those savings realized, I guess?
I'm trying to understand that question. Marilyn?
It's Marilyn. I believe the answer is it's taxing less.
Okay.
If I understood it correctly.
Yeah, I think that answers the question. The other, I guess the follow-up to that. So if a department ends up being able to hire past their assumed to lower their vacancies below that assumed vacancy rate, that's assumed in the originally included one-time savings due to vacant positions, where would they get that money? You say they can transfer from department to department. Is there another budget mechanism for assuming that you can hire above?
So typically, for the first part of the year, there'd be no issue. And then coming toward, the second part of the year, you would notice, you'd be the head of that department. Let's say you're the head of libraries, because I think that's the one area where we think we may have an issue. We may be fortunate to have an issue. The head of libraries may say, my budget is running hot. And then we would ask to appropriate from one department to another, and we would just transfer budget. And there will be a department that underspends, and there could be a department that overspends. And you would shuffle from one to another. And you never want to approach it like this. You never want to approach it where every department has a budget that they would absolutely unconditionally be able to adhere to. Because if you set a budget like that, then your budget is overfunded, and now you've got a flawed budget, right? You've got a budget that is too high, and therefore you've over budgeted on labor, which means that now you've under budgeted on maybe a road or a school or something else. And so it's hard. It's a massaging exercise, because what you try to do is you try to hit labor just right so that you can budget for other activities, right? But that's difficult, if that makes any sense.
Yeah,
go ahead. To do a budget transfer from department to department, say from management and budget to libraries, if management and budget is running under budget and libraries is running over budget, does that require assembly action? Okay.
I'm not sure 15 years ago it did, but Maryland says it does now, so.
Some of those would be dealt with like in a Q1 revision process, probably, right? That would be where a lot of those things would be trued up if possible.
Well, so Q1 might be too early to know that your budget is running hot. But if you knew as early as Q1 that your budget was going to run hot, well, if you had a new labor contract that was ratified, you could deal with that in Q1.
Yeah. Folks online, do you guys have questions?
None for me.
Put everybody to sleep.
No, this is what we're here for.
I don't have.
That's right.
I've got several on the maintenance operations still. And I understand the debt service. I believe I understand the debt service piece only because, you know, we probably had several GEO bonds that were intended to do capital improvements on our roads and streets, which that makes perfect sense. That's why, you know, the maintenance operation budget is 60. Their debt service is about 68, almost 70% of the total debt service currently. I guess my concern, a little bit of concern, is a couple of things. One, I also looked at this might be more operational question than budget question, but looking at our performance metrics for a couple of these things, one of them being the annual storm structure cleaning, they have a goal of 100% have those cleaned, and we haven't hit 20% yet, unless I'm reading the data correctly. Or incorrectly, it certainly appears like we're not meeting that goal. And my little bit of concern is does this also impact our environmental PM2 compliance? So that's you know, a potential.
So I'm not sure what you're looking at, but I do know that before I was CFO of the municipality, I was CFO of Anchorage Water and Wastewater Utility, and the late Mark Primo, who was president of AWW for a long time, for a very long time, desired to create a stormwater utility managed by AWW. And one of the reasons why he felt that a stormwater utility within AWW was necessary was to ensure that AWW was fortunate enough as an enterprise fund to have the ability to ensure compliance with metrics like the one that you're mentioning. Sometimes, you know, the enterprise funds are the land of milk and honey, where you've got resources to ensure compliance with maintenance, right? And but there was not enough support to actually create the stormwater utility. Another reason why he was desirous of that was for flood mitigation reasons, to expand the existing stormwater utility.
So anyway, that's one thing I noted. Then the other note, I guess, and you know, looking back at metrics and thinking about this debt service is the fact that I imagine, and I don't know, I'd have to go back and look, but you know, I imagine some of the capital expenditures was on equipment, whether it's, you know, heavy equipment, may even be our police fleet that we maintain, or the government vehicle fleet. And again, looking at those metrics, we're doing a pretty good job of keeping our general government fleet running, but the heavy equipment, we're, you know, again, the goal is 90%, and we are in the 70s for that, and then also roughly 80s for the APD vehicle fleet. And the point being there is that, you know, it seems like we're kind of in a losing battle if we're not able to maintain the fleet that we invested in. Yet we're still paying quite a bit of money on that service. again, I'm sure it's more an operational issue than a budget issue, but it's something that I guess we should be considering.
Do you feel like you have a recommendation about it, Mark, or?
Well, I guess my question, well, yeah, I could go back to the 10 years we talked about the alcohol tax, money, but we haven't really talked about the motor vehicle tax money that's been collected for probably about the last 10 years. And I think all of that just goes into the general fund. And but if we are spending 40% of our vehicle or our maintenance and operation budget on debt service, there might be a consideration to look at a way to vector some of our motor fuel tax toward what that motor fuel tax really is supposed to be intended for, which is maintaining our roads and streets.
Interesting point. Are you concerned about M&O from like top of mind snow removal standpoint, or the adequacy of services or capacity for services?
Well, I think it's just, we have this pretty sizable budget. People see almost $110 million budget and they think, wow, why can't we take care of our streets? Why can't we get the snow off in a reasonable amount of time? And I think the Munich has actually demonstrated a pretty, valiant effort in that in the last week. I was incredibly impressed, and I have a history with the state, right, and their maintenance operations, and I would say that the reflection of that performance is directly correlated to their budget, and so that's why we have muni streets that are getting cleaned much quicker than state roads. But the point being is, yeah, I think if we truly do care about a fairly important and sizable piece of our infrastructure, we should be funding it appropriately.
Might be, this group last year, after the big December, snowstorm that we had the M&O director come to our meeting. I think it was the department head, but responsibility for snow removal, and gave an explanation of like what was it that caused like the delays and the factors that made it slower. It might actually be a good conversation to have, especially if it's something you want to dig into and you've got some expertise in, Mark. It might be something that we look at for a December or January meeting. If we had the department come in and talk to us about some of these things, we could have a conversation about service delivery and budget adequacy, whatever it might be.
Yeah, I'd love to hear from him. I think the Muni's doing really, really well, dealing with the amount of snow that we're getting. And, but I think also we could be, we're not seeing the long-term effects yet if the budget's not adequate.
So I think we're probably, in our agenda, I think we probably have our, the space we have now is kind of bleeding into our general discussion about the budget. I think, so in past years, we have, we've done we do a resolution, a budget resolution, and we say, we like this part, we commend the assembly for this, but we think this amount should be changed, or this amount should be lowered, or this amount should be increased, and then we pass that. That's our kind of one of our big work products for, for the budget cycle is our resolution. So so we should discuss if we want to do a resolution and what kind of contents, what we should say. So I think that's probably the discussion we should be having now is what we think about this budget, we think about some of these amendments. This is our chance to weigh in on the process. When does the assembly vote on the budget? Is it December?
Next Tuesday.
It's next Tuesday?
Next Tuesday, the assembly votes on all budget.
Okay, so we have like a very narrow window here to vote, to weigh in on this budget. I did make a note. I did jot down some of the very largest items that are budget amendments that are maybe some things we could talk about. Like, I think that's one thing we could discuss. These are items that are in play. The 2.6 million vacancy factor discussion is one. The 2.8 million for police collective bargaining and the labor increase, the $3 million housing fund. There's a $2 million increase for the emergency shelter also. 2 million for allowed camps, so for basically sanctioned camps for unhoused individuals, $2 million for a safety center. And then there's a $1.75 million amendment for the Alaska Children's Trust as well. So these are all items that are in there. Not doing them justice as far as like each one of these has a story behind them that I'm talking about at a pretty high level. But I think, I think this is, so what do we want to talk about? What are the large items that we want to weigh in on this budget and say we're in favor of this or not in favor of that?
I appreciate the conversation, a little more detail about this $3 million housing amendment. I would agree that I would recommend our position is that there needs to be a lot more detail before we encourage them to add another $3 million.
The problem is that some people on the assembly, they don't devise a plan and then fund the plan. They take the money and then we got a solution. And that's what we want to get away from, is that do your planning first. Get that in place, and then you come back and fund it. Because what happens, that becomes slush money. And I do have some concerns about that. And I apologize, I've been so busy at the office that we just got through with all our tax extensions. And so anyway, I haven't had a chance to take a look at things, but I think you brought up some excellent points that we could program off of that. And the numbers, that you have. And maybe some other suggestions too. But I don't feel comfortable in giving a blanket approval to the budget.
You mean just in general for the resolution? Do you have? I think the best thing to do is to think in terms of like specifics that we do or don't agree with, right? And are there any that stand out for you in particular?
Well, I think you brought up the list there of them.
Yes.
For consideration, and I would also emphasize that when you take a look at the cost of a homeless person, which is between $3,000 and $4,000 a month, for every 2.5 homeless people, you can hire a policeman. So I would like to see the police department be adequately funded to perform maintenance, recruits, and training. We did have a recommendation at the Midtown Council that when you have people that are going to retire and you have a shortage of officers, then just offer them a $10,000 bonus. Let it stay another year.
I think that probably is a good one for us to talk about if we're in favor of the $2.8 million increase. To me, it seems like probably shouldn't even be an amendment. It should have just been in the budget proposal. Maybe it's a timing issue. Is that one that folks are generally agreeing on or want to weigh in on? Yeah, Matthew.
Yeah, just start with the easy. I think since it's a result of collective bargaining negotiations, I don't think the budget as a blunt instrument should be used to veto collective bargaining negotiations. So
yeah, I'd agree with that. Do other folks have discussion on it? Then some of the other items, the $3 million housing fund, Mark made the comment, it probably needs some work, probably not quite ready for prime time. I don't know if that's yeah.
Yeah, just with regards to, I guess, housing in general, it seems like there's, that amendment, which was to the real estate department, and then a few other amendments to the legislative branch, the assembly group. I think, with regards to the housing Housing Action Week and the Housing Summit, there's policy things that, or policy actions that were a result of those things, policy recommendations that needed to be worked on. And then it seemed like a few budget things, but it seemed like more so planning and policy things that needed to come out as a result of that. So I think until maybe some of the planning and policy recommendations can be acted on, I guess I could support, the further planning and communication aspect of the legislative department, the assembly's actions, if those relate to communicating code changes as mentioned in the amendments and policy changes that they're going to be doing. But I don't know, and until further planning gets done, whether the 3 million for the real estate department would be a good idea, or until I guess the intent and justification and what that 3 million actualized would look like. I don't know if I could support that.
Yeah, I'm in favor of, housing is a big issue, the concern for me, but probably it is something that maybe needs some workshopping, which I'm in my sense. Other kinds of things, there's 2 million, and maybe Sharon, maybe you can speak to things like the 2 million for the emergency shelter and the 2 million for the safety center. Are those items you have much familiarity?
I apologize, it is my first day on the job, and I just don't know anything about those two items.
We'll give you an out this time.
Next year, I'll be able to answer every item, but I just don't know about those items.
Yeah, those do strike me as potentially very important. There's also 2 million for the sanctioned camps, so there's a package of about 6 million items that relate to homelessness. That probably I wish I had a better grounding on, honestly.
Just I guess the general question. I'm not really sure if other people might know more about this than I do, but I know there was resolutions, like kind of policy changes that the Assembly was looking at making with regards to sanctioned camps. Along with them, as they make those policy changes, is there associated budget changes that go along with if they make a policy change to code allowing for sanctioned camps or something like that? Does that policy change outside of the budget process come along with budget changes, or is this amendment a result of prior code changes that were made due to Assembly action?
So I think the emergency cold weather shelter is amendment number 25. And it was proposed as a one-time amendment, which might answer your question. And the answer would be no, which could be problematic because it sounds like a capital proposal to purchase some form of shelter, but not necessarily simultaneously provide any form of who's going to manage the shelter. And I did, even though I wasn't yet an employee, I did listen in on the amendments. I marked that it was proposed as a January through April 2024 item. So either it's an operating amendment with 4 months of funding that's being proposed only once, not to be repeated next year because they proposed it as a one-time item, or it's a capital item where they're proposing to build a shelter, which would be impossible because you can't build a shelter by January 1. So it has to be operating, but they're only proposing it this year, but not next year. So hard to say. Hard to say how, if it's operating, they could have it up and running by January, right? That'd be difficult.
Well, they got to plan first and then get that approved and then fund it.
Yeah, there has been plenty of planning on homelessness. I'm not sure we've always followed the plans, but so I mean, what our position on that might be is whether we support additional resources going towards the issue of homelessness, whether we commend that in more broad terms rather than weighing in on the specific amendments. That can be something that we put into our budget resolution. Yeah.
I think maybe just generally, I think the supporting or opposing things in broad terms is probably the best move for us as a commission. It's hard to dive in detail to some of these issues. So I think maybe there's some specific things that we can support or oppose that have kind of broad support within the commission. But overall, like with regards to maybe vacancies or ensuring that amendments fall or under tax capacity or are viable, just kind of in broad terms, or if we're looking at housing and homelessness amendments, advocating for alignment with the housing strategic plan, or if there's a related homelessness plan, just in broad terms, and advocating for alignment with plans, viability of amendments under tax capacity or with available fund balance, and maybe just best practices with regard to vacancies and just in general terms, and also alignment with the collective bargaining agreements negotiated outside of the budget process or things like that.
Well, that was one of the things I was going to mention is that I don't know if this is a bad assumption, but I'm assuming that the Assembly looked at the space under the tax cap for these amendments, right? So that they're not going to exceed that capacity. But I think that is something that we also, again, it's a general statement, is that whatever the total amendments are, that we can't be underneath that cap.
Yeah, and I think the Assembly members, propose amendments knowing that not all of them are going to pass, right? Then knowing, but that there's going to have to be a discussion about which ones make it in, right? And within that, subject to that cap. I do know that one concern is that, this budget is a reduction from last year of around 12 million, it's like 11.9 million or something like that, I think, if I have the number right. And so the effect of that is always like when we have under our tax cap formula, is that sets that helps set next year's amount, right? And so it does, so we can end up in a situation where we have, in 2025, we're talking about like almost kind of an unallocated cut that we have to be talking about, right? That from one-time cuts this year, but we still have, ongoing costs next year. So whether we want to weigh in on that, we're reducing our tax capacity in future years to some extent. And so that kind of flows through to all of our municipal services, including things like the M&O concerns you were talking about. Is that something we want to have an opinion about?
Hey, Nolan, this is Lindsay. I think so. I think that's an important, as far as a global consideration for the Assembly. And then, I think what we've done in years past that I've always found pretty helpful is, is it Sharon? Sorry, I don't think I could hear her name clearly. Sharon?
Yeah.
Your some predecessors in this position have kind of summarized our conversation and have been able to, and I think that you are providing some unique insight that I would like to be able to capture. So if there's like a chance that could be, summarized, and then we can take that to draft as part of our resolution that we could then consider and vote on. Do you recall that, Nolan, or am I completely making this up?
As far as how the resolution was done, we've
yeah.
As far as the support with drafting, it's been done both ways. Where I think you and I did some drafting of it one year, but in the past when Lance Wilbur he would write it for us, and we would modify from there. We could probably, it depends a little bit on OMB capacity, right? We love the extra support. Times in the past so if you wanted to, if there was the ability to like kind of capture these comments and put them into a document that we could kind of work with and modify, we've usually been able to do it just through email chains or like email review, people commenting.
Do we email all of you?
There's we have to follow. We do always have to make sure we're following some of the open meetings considerations.
Okay.
I think that we've been able to sort of pass around like a draft and put comments into it though, in the past.
Okay.
And then we can by email agree to we support.
I just want to make sure that we follow the rules.
Yeah, I think, we may, I don't know if we need guidance from the clerk or anything like that, because I don't recall all the specifics of the open meeting.
Okay.
Yeah, definitely want to make sure we're.
Okay. No, we're happy to assist.
I think as long as we're not meeting, like having a side Teams meeting with more than two of us, then, circulate an email. is acceptable. I'm just,
So email circulation is okay, but small meetings are not okay. Okay.
Yeah, I think we have to, I mean, if like, three of us got together and met, I think it's okay. I think it follows quorum, right? If we got
Yeah,
together and had
exactly.
quorum, I think
Okay.
it would be a meeting.
Okay.
So they're gonna prepare us a draft. Staff.
Trying to articulate what I think the consensus is. And then if we got it all wrong, you can fix it. Is that right?
Sure, yeah.
Okay,
Good.
okay.
And the other piece that I was interested in, Sharon, would be to also, it seemed like you had some things jotted down, regarding some of the amendments, and I would like to be able to look at that in a bit more detail. So I don't know if that's notes or, I mean, I do not want to fill up your plate, or if you want to incorporate that somehow that we could just look at it, that would be great, but.
Okay.
Don't want to overwhelm you on your first day.
You know, we can call a special meeting too, if we have to.
We could.
I'm happy to do that,
Yeah.
especially since we only have so much time.
between now and next Monday.
I would be fine. I don't know if there's I don't know if we can we squeeze in a special meeting before next Monday? I don't know if people's schedules work for that. I can make the priority probably. But.
I'm free.
Good.
Do we want to try to do a special work session? We could even make it, maybe if it's easier for people, we could make it a virtual one, and we could, I don't know.
Do you have to publicly notice it?
You do.
We would have to publicly notice it, yeah, so we're up against limitations there.
Well, but, I think the wording is reasonable, right? There isn't a specific date, number of days, I believe, but I don't know, maybe I'm wrong on the Open Meetings Act, but I think as long as you notice it, that we're gonna have one.
Well, and if we're not taking action, I think that changes the notice requirement.
Yep.
So if it's a work session, I am available Friday.
Yeah, Friday is a good day for me too.
Is it like a mid-morning, 10 a.m. or 11, I mean, a normal time, 11:30 could be, is there a time window like that works best for folks?
It looks like it should work for me.
Okay.
I'm available anytime after 10:45.
Whole day's free. Okay. So we could just make it 11:30 if we want. That is a good time, a normal time.
That works for me.
Okay. Do we want to just do it as virtual? I don't know if we can get the room or reserved or not. Maybe it's easier to just do virtual.
It might have to be virtual.
Okay, let's do virtual.
Okay.
That's probably fine for this. This could probably be an efficient conversation.
It does look like the requirement under the Open Meetings Act is reasonable public notice. So, but maybe it's just if we notice it as soon as possible. I'm not sure what the.
Okay. Sure. Well, good. Glad to have this momentum. Then let's see. Probably to wrap things up. Then I don't think we have any member of the public online or in person as far as audience participation goes. And then as far as our next meeting is scheduled, it's going to be December 14th, our next regular meeting. As far as a topic for that one, I think we had a police department report down, which we could certainly proceed with if we wanted to. Another option might actually be to have, if the M&O director could meet with us, if that were to work out schedule-wise. I think there might be a good discussion to be had there. So.
Either one.
Yeah. So yeah, maybe if M&O is not available, maybe we could do police. I don't know.
One or the other.
One or the other.
One or the other.
I know they're busy folks, but yeah. Thank you.
Preference on maintenance and operations, no?
I would say maintenance and operations is very timely. I would say, yeah.
I think they're both important, but if maintenance operations is available, then that, and if not, then police.
Good. Then I think we're at 101. I think I would hear a motion to adjourn, unless there's one.
Just really quick.
Yeah.
Sorry. So Friday, 11:30 is the final.
Yeah, Friday, 11:30.
Sorry, just wanted to verify.
I'll send out the invitation here.
Okay, thanks,
Sorry about that.
Yeah, good. confirm. Yeah, motion to adjourn then,
So moved.
second?
Seconded.
All right, thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Nolan.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Al.
Good.
What a good meeting.
Yeah, definitely.
Did you ask her?
So the hardest part about those resolutions is just all the
Which some of them are sort of filler too, you know?
Yeah, somehow I got them wrong.
Blue skies are nice.
Whereas the assembly has a budget. Municipality needs a budget.
Yeah, some of that stuff is boilerplate, that's easy.
Especially if you know your subject matter. It's a lot.
Prefer if that was actually visible.
I'll leave it.
Who's on that?
We're gonna meet on Friday, right?
Thank you.
Friday, 11:30. Yes, yes.